The night my son's future father-in-law sat across from me at my own kitchen table, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "Sign this document or I go to the FBI." He was smiling, the slow, patient smile of a man who believes he is holding every card in the deck. What he did not know, what no one in that room knew, was that the man sitting across from him in the faded flannel shirt and scuffed work boots had been waiting for exactly this conversation for 18 years, and I had not spent 18 years waiting to lose. My name is Robert Carver. Most people call me Bob. If you passed me on a Tuesday morning outside my house in Columbus, Ohio, old jeans, coffee in hand, watering the tomatoes I have absolutely no business growing because I have never read a gardening book in my life, you would think, retired electrician, maybe a weekend fisherman. You would not think founder and sole owner of Carver Capital Group. For 26 years, my firm has invested in undervalued companies, turned them around, and built something real from pieces other people walked away from. We operate across 11 states. Last year, we managed assets that would make your breakfast go cold if I gave you the number. I drive a 2009 Ford F-150 with a dent above the rear wheel I keep telling myself I'll fix. I own one good watch, my father's, a Seiko. Not because I can't afford another one, because it was his, and it still runs, and that means something. I built what I built quietly on purpose, because I watched what money does to men who wear it loudly, how it makes them sloppy, predictable, easy to read. I decided a long time ago that if I ever had something worth protecting, I would not make it obvious. My son Marcus is 34, steady, thoughtful, the kind of man who calls when he says he'll call and means what he says when he says it. I am more proud of him than anything I have ever built. Last November, he brought home Jessica Reed. She was warm, genuine. She brought pie, homemade, not from a box, and she asked my opinion on things and actually listened to the answers. I liked her immediately. I still ran the background check, and that is exactly where this story begins. The background report came back on a Thursday afternoon. I was on my porch with coffee when my assistant sent it over. Standard procedure: I scroll, I skim, I move on. I did not move on. Jessica Reed. Father, Gerald Reed. I set the coffee mug down on the porch railing, very carefully. The way you set something down when your hands have suddenly gone very deliberate, because I knew that name. 18 years ago, Gerald Reed had been a licensed financial advisor at Meridian Wealth Partners, a mid-size firm that managed retirement accounts for working-class families in the Columbus area. Teachers, nurses, firefighters, people who saved every month for 30 years and trusted someone else to protect it. Gerald had been churning those accounts, running trades not because they were good for his clients, but because every trade generated a commission for him. Quietly, consistently, the way a slow leak drains a tank. You don't notice until it's nearly empty. My firm had flagged the irregularities during a routine audit. We had no obligation to report it. It wasn't our account, it wasn't our problem. I reported it anyway. The SEC investigation took 14 months. Gerald Reed lost his license, lost his career. His firm collapsed. He spent every year since telling anyone who would listen that a powerful investor had destroyed him out of jealousy, out of greed, that he was the victim of a man with money and no conscience. That man, in his version of the story, was me, and now his daughter was in love with my son. I sat on that porch for a long time. Then I made 2 phone calls. The first was to my attorney. The second was to Marcus, to tell him that dinner with Jessica's parents sounded like a wonderful idea, because here's what 26 years of building something teaches you. You do not run from the people who want to tear it down. You set the table, and you wait. The dinner was at my house, my idea, home field, as they say. Patricia Reed arrived carrying wine and a smile that had been assembled very carefully. Gerald walked in behind her in a sport coat, and the particular confidence of a man who has been rehearsing something. He shook my hand, both hands, the double grip, the kind that says either I am deeply sincere or I have been practicing this handshake in a mirror. "Bob," he said, "I have been looking forward to this." "Me too," I said, and I meant it. We ate. The conversation moved the way first family dinners do, careful, warm, everyone being a slightly better version of themselves. Marcus talked about a project he was working on. Jessica helped me carry plates and told a story about their first date that made the whole table laugh. Gerald asked about my work. I told him I was mostly retired. He nodded, poured himself more wine, filed me under, not a problem, good. About 45 minutes in, right after the main course, right at the exact moment I was beginning to think I had misjudged the timeline, Gerald Reed set down his fork, reached into the inside pocket of his sport coat, and placed a document folder on my kitchen table. Brown, plain, the size of something that took real time to assemble. Jessica stared at it, then at her father. "Dad," she said quietly. "What is that?" He didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on me. His voice dropped. The practiced drop of a man who has waited a long time for this sentence. "Bob," he said, "I think it's time this family had an honest conversation about the past, about what happened 18 years ago, and what it cost the people in this room." Marcus went completely still beside me. I looked at the folder, then at Gerald, then at Jessica. Jessica's face was open, unguarded, genuinely confused. She had no idea what was in that folder, and in that moment, I understood exactly what kind of man her father was. Not a threat. A man who had just used his own daughter as a prop in a scene he wrote, without ever telling her she was in it. Inside the folder were printed documents, organized, labeled, built with the kind of careful neatness that says someone spent real time on this. Gerald's version was clean and simple. Bob Carver's firm had filed a false SEC report, fabricated evidence, used its power to destroy a competitor, and walked away clean while an innocent man lost everything. He had assembled this story like a weapon, piece by piece, over 18 years. I let him present every single page. When he finished, he folded his hands on the table, the gesture of a man who believes the evidence has already spoken for him. I reached down beside my chair and placed my own folder on the table. Older, heavier. The kind of worn edges that come from being opened many times over many years. "Gerald," I said, "let me show you something." I opened to the first page. This is the original transaction report. Our audit team flagged in 2006. Not fabricated. Pulled directly from Meridian's own account records. A matter of SEC public filing to this day. Every account, every trade, every commission you collected on a transaction that served you and cost your client. His jaw tightened. "This," I said, turning to the next page, "is a letter from a retired school teacher named Dorothy Simmons. She lost $41,000 from her retirement account over 3 years. She was 62 years old when the investigation concluded. She did not have time to recover it." The table was very quiet, and this, I said, turning to the last page, is the SEC's official case summary, public record available to anyone who looks, in which your name appears 11 times, Gerald, not mine. Gerald said nothing. His hands, which had been folded so confidently a moment ago, were no longer folded. Patricia reached for her wine glass, didn't drink from it, just held it. And the folder sat on that table like a door that had just been permanently, quietly closed. It was Marcus who spoke first. "Dad." His voice was quiet, careful, the tone of a man whose entire understanding of the last 8 months is being gently rearranged. "How long have you known?" I looked at my son. "Since November," I said. "The week Jessica first came to dinner." Silence. "You knew who her father was?" "Yes." "And you said nothing?" "No." He exhaled slowly, looked at the table, then back at me. "Because of Jessica," he said. "Because of Jessica," I said. "And here's what I need you to understand. When I found Gerald Reed's name in that report, I had a choice. One conversation with Marcus, and Jessica would have been nothing more than a name he used to know. Clean, simple, done. But I ran Jessica's background separately, and what I found was a young woman who had spent her whole life being told one story, that her father was a good man who had been destroyed by someone powerful. She believed it because she loved him, because that is what children do before they see the full picture. She had no part in what Gerald did. She never had. And I was not going to take my son's happiness away because of choices made by a man she happened to be born to. I turned to Jessica. She was very still, her hands flat on the table. The stillness of someone whose understanding of a person they love is being quietly, permanently rewritten. "Jessica," I said gently, "nothing that happened tonight is about you. You did not bring this to this table. You did not know it was coming, and I need you to hear me clearly. You are not responsible for a single word of it." Her eyes came to mine. They were wet. Did he do it? She asked, very quietly. The accounts, the commissions, did he actually do it? I held her gaze. Yes, I said, he did. Gerald stood up sharply. Jessica, that is not the full. Dad, one word. The voice of a woman who has just watched the version of her father she has carried her entire life. Quietly walk out of the room. Sit down. He sat down. What happened in the next 20 minutes? I will not give you in full detail, because some things belong only to the people inside them. What I will tell you is this. Gerald Reed had prepared for a fight, for threats for a man who would get loud and give him something to push back against. He had not prepared for a man who simply placed the truth on the table and sat back. He left quietly. No dramatics, just a man who had finally run out of moves, putting on his coat and walking to my front door. At the threshold he turned. I lost everything, he said, not angry, just tired. The tiredness of a man who has carried something heavy for too long. I looked at him for a moment. I know, I said, but Gerald, Dorothy Simmons, lost something too, and she was 62 years old and she never got it back. He didn't answer. The door closed. Jessica sat at my kitchen table for a long time. Marcus sat beside her and said nothing, which was exactly the right thing to do. After a while, she looked up at me. You found out in November, she said, and you still let me come back. You still let Marcus and I. She stopped. You are not your father, I said. You never were. And I was not going to punish my son for someone else's choices. She nodded once, then stood up, walked around the table, and hugged me. I drove home later in the F-150. The city moved past the windows, and I let it go. I thought about Gerald Reed, about what it does to a man when he mistakes his own guilt for someone else's fault. About how that particular confusion, when it goes untreated long enough, becomes the only story he knows how to tell. I thought about Marcus, about the man he had become entirely on his own. I thought about Jessica, who had walked into my son's life as a stranger and sat at my kitchen table that night as something I hadn't expected to find again. Someone worth protecting. My phone buzzed in the driveway. Marcus, she wants to know if you'll teach her your chili recipe. She says she's been asking me for 3 months and I keep telling her I don't know it. I sat in the dark truck and smiled. He doesn't know it because I never gave it to him. I typed back, Sunday. Tell her to bring an appetite and 2 hours. Some men build things to prove something. I built mine to protect something. And on that Sunday, with my son and the woman he loved, standing in my kitchen, learning to make something from scratch, that something finally felt safe. If this story hit different, subscribe. We tell true stories about the men who build quietly, fight fiercely, and never once announce it. New story every week. You belong here.